So, welcome to another podcast. This week, I picked a topic that's going to be privacy and a little bit of AI as well with privacy, but this will be very reminiscent of 1984 around where we go with data. So, Naveen, I had this idea, and we referred to this in the previous podcast around IT systems generate data, which is typically humans doing things in IT systems.
Yep.
OT systems generate data, which is like machine learning and logs and machines. And I think in the ad world, with social media, humans started generating a lot of like clickstream data on browsers, and now we know that if we say anything, our phones are listening to us as well.
True.
So if you say lawnmowers, you're going to see lawnmowers and your ads for the rest of the day. So
That's supposedly coincidence, but yeah.
supposedly, if you read the end user terms. But I'm thinking about this from a lens of efficiency in data. So the first kind of question I have is a company with employees and people on our team, how do you feel about your employer collecting data about you? And that could be things like bad scans all the way through keystrokes on your keyboard, all the way through, video cameras in the hallway. Like, what is your view on employers collecting information about employees?
It sends me down like a very deep, dark, dystopian path for sure. But I think maybe before we go through all the dark sides of it, maybe we should explain why people want to do this, right? People collect data because, there's some outcome they're trying to drive, right? And we've done this for a long time. So it's not like, I think a lot of this stuff is very disturbing, but I think there's a lot of data that people like, for example, that we could first say like data is good, right? So let's say we're talking about, hey, is the plane that you're flying on going to stay in the air, right? We could collect data on how everything operates, on failure modes. There's things that do fail on planes, but there's a backup, and what's the probability that something's always going to be working, right? So I think we've become data oriented as a culture because it helps us solve problems.
Well, and I think everyone's accepted that the data in the plane scenario is okay.
Exactly.
Right? We've agreed, and maybe me as a social scientist, I'm like, well, if it's okay around the machine, why can't it be okay around the people?
Exactly.
Because
and actually, airlines would be another good example of that. I actually don't know if this is true or not, but I feel like it's true because I've experienced it. I think airlines collect metrics on how long does it take to plane and deplane. What if I ask people to board the plane in groups? What if I ask them to just board randomly? What if I do, in Southwest, have them line up? They collect data on the people too, and I think this probably happens everywhere in the world we live in. Our grocery stores know what we buy; they know what to advertise to us. So, I think we're actually also okay with the people aspect of it. I would claim.
Well, I think the question is how okay, because I think we view things in the world of convenience,
Yes.
saying I'm willing to trade privacy for convenience.
And safety.
And safety. Michelle actually brought this up yesterday. She's like, I would love if there was a camera on every street corner because then we'd have less crime.
Yes.
Right? So I think safety and convenience is definitely a viewpoint where I wouldn't argue is a futuristic thing. I think we're there. Largely as a social norm, traded those things for convenience.
Right.
I know Europe has some different mindset in that with GDPR around, who owns the data and your right to be forgotten and all of those things. But if we park that for a second, okay, that's a societal norm. Now let's bring it back to the employer scenario.
Yep.
Is that social norm extended to the employment workplace?
Well, I can't believe I'm arguing on this side. It is in the interest of a corporation or your employer to, we all want, as employees even, we want our company to be as effective as it possibly can be, right? So what leads to us as employees being more effective? Does that mean hours on the clock? I think we could clearly say if I worked 0 hours, my productivity is 0, right? So clearly there's a relationship to how much I work. is my productivity, if I normally work 40 hours a week, if I'm now working 100, am I 2.5 times more effective? I don't know.
Well, yeah, there's always these work. So I think you bring an interesting point that we should deep dive, which is, is data flawed? What's the data model? How do you use the data? Those types of things. So we'll come back to that. But
Okay.
I think let's stay in the philosophical place for a second. Okay, we have this data, and let's assume that the employer's okay using the data and the employee is okay using the data. And I'll give a use case. Last week we had Ops Review, and one of the engineers in Prague did an analysis of using the Google Calendar data to figure out whether we're disadvantaging Prague, Bangalore, or North America from a particular staying up late or not, and do we have imbalances of expectations across our workforce where we're expecting some teams like Prague to stay late versus North America to come in early,
right,
in a global working environment. So we effectively used the data there to figure out whether we have workforce bias, right? And I think that was a positive use case.
That's a pretty
data.
cool analysis, to be honest.
And it was done, and we can look at hotspots by manager and by team and by site, and it's just a standard use of data.
Yep.
Right. So I think companies are doing these types of things, and that's a net positive thing. But in that analysis, you can make certain assumptions, like, is your calendar your only view of working hours? This is kind of what you were getting into terms of, like, one, is your data source good, like your quality of data?
Yep.
And two, is your perspective on how you use that data good?
Yep.
And we're just assuming right now we'll stay in the positive intent category versus negative intent.
Yes, of course.
I think we'll get around to discussing
Maybe,
intent,
yeah.
but let's just assume right now everyone's thinking about using this data for productivity, positivity,
Yep.
et cetera, right?
And that's a blind spot for mine, which is like, I think we all want to impart good upon the world, except for the people who don't. And so,
Yeah, and we, the question is, should we let the bad apples spoil it as well? That's always the risk in,
Yep.
Cyber criminals use crypto for hiding crime, right?
Yeah.
So I think the nature of data and data privacy, I think we would both posit we're in an era where privacy is already gone.
I don't know if I've ever made that admission to myself. Oh man, yeah.
You have a phone.
I
Just
mean,
admit it.
That's fair, and I do have. I have all of the voice-activated devices things on.
And I
all the
don't. I
time.
have them off in the house.
It's just like, oh man, yeah, okay, fine, yeah, it's gone. But
Privacy's gone.
Yeah.
Right. So in the next generation, this won't even be a debate.
yeah,
Like, we're kind of in this middle generation where we're like, oh, data and privacy and whatever.
Yeah.
The next generation, is growing up in a world where that's the new normal.
yeah, fair enough. I mean, I'm doing a freaking podcast, so
There you go,
Yeah,
right?
so,
Information's out there. So let's accept that privacy is gone. Now, how do you ensure that, what is your advice to folks in terms of how to understand the quality of data, right? Especially when the source is human.
Yep.
Right? And two, how to create a good context to analyze that data to do something positive.
Yeah.
What is your advice to people in that?
Actually,
domain?
I might flip that right back at you. But so I think that when we're using data, I think we're trying to achieve outcomes, right? So in the case of the calendar overlap one, it's trying to say, I'm assuming it was coming from the perspective of, hey, are we being fairer to each geo, right? Or is one kind of inflicting more effort or pain on the other, so to speak, right? So I think we're always trying to say, what is the outcome? And again, coming back to what do we use data for, like another thing that we do in companies is, okay, you have a sales pipeline, right? We measure funnel and we try and say, okay, of the people that we could reach, how many are we reaching from a marketing perspective, how many are engaging, and so on. All of that is to achieve the outcome of, like selling a good, right? So I think to answer that question, we always have to come back to, well, what are we trying to do? Like data is pointless by itself. Like we could measure the height of every employee and then average that and then figure out like, is North America taller than, these would be pointless exercises, but it's data. So I think it all comes down to what are we trying to achieve?
Well, so I've been in and around the data space for a long time, and there used to be a world where that was always the starting point to data. Before you even collect it, it's like, what's the question? Why should I collect it? What should I collect? And at the time, storage was more expensive. Compute was more expensive. So there were actually financial reasons. As infrastructure has become more accessible, commoditized, lower unit economics, et cetera, people stopped asking the why, and they're just like, collect everything, because in case, I might need to. And then I would argue that kind of standard norms right now are like, well, if it's older than a year or older than a month or whatever, like let it go, right? Like there's always some like time aging element that goes in. I think if you would just get past, what I would consider the juvenile state of thinking about that problem set, there's two approaches that you can take. One is the one you mentioned, which is what I would consider data analytics. Think of a problem, think of a question, think of the data you need, think of the analysis you want to do, and then go build that, right? All the way from collection to ingest to storage to database to whatever, right? There's a whole data pipeline. The other thing, which emerged in kind of the big data era, was data science, which was, I don't know the problem. Let me collect everything, send this team of data scientists to go tell me things that I may not know. It's like the needle in a haystack analysis problem.
Yes.
And there, the thesis is like, no data is bad data, right? You just need more.
Yeah.
And in computer science, there emerged new formulas of, okay, what is a good outcome from data? And the equations change to volume of data, meaning have more, and you could downsample, like you're trading like the source amount versus the sampling amount. So if you sample, you can reduce it, and how much does downsampling data reduce your R squared on your predictive outcome, right? So those things we taught in big data or data science classes in universities for a period of time.
Yeah.
I think we're even beyond that era now. That was in the 2000s-ish time frame, right? Maybe 20 years ago. So now you could say, okay, I could start with a question, or I could do the needle in the haystack thing. Do you agree that there are certain types of problem sets, or what types of problem sets would be valuable in the needle in a haystack collect everything world?
Yeah, so let's unpack the needle in the haystack thing. So I was wondering if you were going to go there. So, and by the way, machine learning has made this much easier too. And I don't actually mean large language models. I mean like the neural net type of classifier learning, right? Yeah. I think what people are doing is they're looking for correlations. And they're saying, hey, I have a bunch of data, and how do I do kind of trend analysis to say, how does all this data fit together in a way that maybe I learn a relationship that I didn't know before? Mm-hmm. And my first answer to that is, I think we as humans immediately then forget the mantra of correlation does not imply causation. And so we start to see all these trends. We're like, oh, well, that's really interesting. Taller people tend to be president. And there might be a reason for that, but this is actually a data science thing that people did, right? There's maybe some advantage based in there, but that doesn't mean a tall person is going to become president. There's just a correlation, and what is related there we don't know, right? And so there's this risk where you start to have all of this data, you can start to see how two things move in tandem. And as humans, because we like to see patterns and then infer from it, we'll be like, well, then that thing caused this, right? I should hire all blue-eyed people because then my sales number are better, right? This is where I think things start to get dangerous.
Well, but I'm going to kind of double down on that. One, let's assume you could say correlation and causation are not the same thing. Or you could say they're not the same thing, but I'm going to assume for the sake of an outcome that I'm not going to be swimming upstream if I go with something that has been corollarily been proved true, right? And I'll give you, so your example was interesting, but weather patterns is always an interesting one, right? Because weather is the needle in a haystack, let's collect a bunch of things and see if we can predict the weather, right? It's like we've evolved weather prediction.
El Nino, La Nina, right?
Yeah, and it's generally, we're still wrong a lot, right? And then people are trying to decide causation. Is like global warming caused by coal, or you know what I mean?
Yep.
So we have strong corollary patterns in weather prediction, but there's a reason the global climate debate is still happening, right? Of what causes global warming, right? And science has not been able to move beyond correlation, as of yet, based on the data, right? Yet, would you argue we shouldn't make policies or economic policies to prevent a global warming based on correlation only?
Interesting. Yeah. So let's let that, and I just maybe to get everyone on the same page. I think, for example, there's a strong correlation between parts per million of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere and global weather patterns, right? Mm-hmm. And there's also theories as to how those are related. But it's definitely not. It's very complicated to connect the dots perfectly, right?
Yeah.
Similar with methane, right?
Yeah.
And this is where I just have bias. I'm like, well, yeah, we should probably act on that. The risks of not acting on that, I don't know if I want to just wait and see that we were wrong or not, right? It's like, we should probably act on that one. And so you're right. I think I fall victim to my own criticism of data, where I'm saying, okay, there's a very strong correlation there. We have ideas of why it could be causation. Therefore, let's act as if it is causation. Right?
Okay, and now I'm going to bring it back into just a hot topic right now, hybrid work, right? And I think I told you I didn't want to talk about this, but my mind went there, right? So there's a lot of debate on whether post-COVID, being in the office was more productive than not being in the office. Yes, and everyone right now, I think it's probably the area where data has been collected by all employers.
Yes.
Lots of research studies are done, right? There's very extreme biases based on correlation on both sides, meaning some people are like, 5 days is the only way. Some people are like, employers are evil if you don't let me work from home 5 days, right? So it's data exists, research exists. There's a lot of correlation-based things, in company executives, myself included, are involved in policy making based on data, right? Where do you fall on the approach to policy decision making for employers based on that data and that set?
Oh man, that's a really, really hard problem. So I'm going to pull. So I'm going to pull away from the hybrid work analogy and give us an analogy, right? Okay. Just of making it simpler, right? Yeah. So because this is where my brain equates it to. It's almost to me like daylight savings time or not daylight savings time. That's literally where my brain goes. It's okay. Should we have daylight savings time or not? And you can go down this data approach of saying here's all the adverse effects of having it. Well, then actually you moved when sunlight is during the day. That has these, your kids are now, at least around here, you're riding to school on their bikes in pitch dark. Yeah. That has a side effect, right? So I think to me, those sorts of questions are binary. And I think it's really, really difficult for me, at least, to understand how to analyze the data. And what I mean by that is I believe data is best used when you're trying to understand levers, right? It's okay, if I want to go 60 miles per hour in my car. If I push the accelerator a little bit more, I'm going to get closer to it or not, right? Yeah. I have a control.
Yeah.
I think there's some of these things where we're trying to answer what I think are binary questions, which means there's a lot more implications of going left or going right than...
So you would say intuitive decision-making based on experience and ignoring data is the better approach for those things.
I would actually argue that maybe what are the other implications that you can see by making decision A versus decision B? And now starting to understand.
So you're saying scientific method, right? Do control experiments with groups A and group B.
No, sorry, I didn't do that.
You saw, I'm like PhD Naveen right there. Like we just saw the PhD come out.
That's an interesting. So that would be an interesting approach. But I think what I mean is more try to figure out what you're trying to solve for. So for example, in the hybrid work thing, I would argue that a lot of people who are arguing for work are arguing for in-person community and in-person relationship building, collaboration and things like that, right? So I don't think I think any data we're using would be just to try and justify a decision so that we don't have to argue about these other things, right? And what I'm getting at is it's these other things that are probably what we're actually trying to get after, and just say like, no, I'm choosing this because that's what I want. Yeah. It's not data. It's I want this outcome.
Yeah, and I do think you're hitting on a big kind of thing in the world of privacy and data, right? Because coming back to where we started the problem, there's one, what do you collect, right? And there you can collect, bad scans and video and logs, and you can collect all sorts of click streams on computers, right? You can collect a lot of things about a human, but how and when do you reason about those things, right? In what cases does it make sense to reason about those things to make policy and decisions? And what is a mental framework that you could guide folks to say, these are the ways where you can avoid confirmation bias? Yep. These are the ways where you could avoid, what are the best ways to avoid abusing data?
I'm actually surprised that I don't know. For me, I just keep coming back to what are we trying to do? Like, okay, I agree with you that we've ended up with these seas of lakes of data, and we throw machines at them and we let them tell us what patterns are, and if you do this, employees are happier than if they're not, and so on. At the end of the day, I want to come at it from an engineering perspective. So as an engineer, and maybe this is going to change, geez, I don't know. But as an engineer, I'm trying to make a targeted outcome. So let's say I want to reduce the failure rate of something, okay? Now I'm going to say, okay, I can measure failure rate, and now I can take my lake of data and just say, what's correlated with failure rate? And it's something I didn't expect, and I go after that, right? So similarly, as an employee, I would say, let's say as a programmer, right? How much time am I spending from when I code a solution to a problem to when I can actually get it into my product in the field, right? That's something we could measure, and you could collect all sorts of random data and just see what's correlated to, hey, your time for your feature to hit the field. But I think you have to pick an outcome metric before you just start looking at data. I'm really fearful of people who are just looking through data as if it's, it's going to elucidate something that we didn't know about the world. I mean, I think it could tell us scary things.
Well, and that's the perfect pivot point into AI, because that's what AI will do, right? So, that is, I think, pre-reasoning AI.
Yeah.
Right now, AI is a synthesis, repetition. It's like fuel on a fire. It's not building the fire. It's not reasoning the fire. It's fuel on the fire, right? And it is given a data lake, and it is there to identify statistical correlations that we assume are causations.
Yes.
Right? In this world. So I'm going to take us to now a dystopian place where assume I'm an evil, let me put on my evil GM kind of hat, right? I'm working and I decide I want to I'm going to use AI, and maybe not from an evil intent, but I think it'll turn out to be evil, is I want to maximize the productivity of my employee base.
Yep.
I want to maximize the retention of my employee base. I want to maximize the happiness index of my employee base.
Yep.
Right? And I'm going to use cameras everywhere to measure, and there are things that do facial recognition that can tell me emotion right now. So I will know how happy people are, right?
And by the way, this is the disturbing, engineer Naveen or something like, I think you should have infrared too, because body
infrared, body temperature, sweat, cortisol. There's actually there will be cortisol's the stress hormone.
Yeah.
So there will come a time, we're not there yet, where you will be able to, based on people's walking in body sweat actually be able to tell how stressed people are,
Yeah.
right, from a continuous cortisol testing thing.
Yeah.
Right? So we're going into a world where there will be more accessibility to things. And I could just I could be like, okay, that thing's going to get fed into a large language model where I, as a GM's like, tell me what to do to like go maximize productivity, happy employees, whatever, like, and then like eventually be like, okay, write the policy documents and publish that and build a webinar. I think this week, I deep faked you in a voice, right? So I could be like, and take the ChatGPT transcript and build a webinar of my voice rolling out this policy to everybody, listen to the feedback in the all hands, and just be me as a GM. You know what I mean? Like, I could take us to a very dystopian place super fast. Yeah. Is that a bad thing?
Actually, the first thing I thought of was, what is it? What do we call it? We have like this survey where it's like employee voice survey or pulse of pure. And it's like, oh man, they can.
Do I need it?
No, I was going to think they can take a very literal meaning.
Here's your pulse. We know your pulse of pure, right?
Exactly.
We know your blood pressure.
Oh man.
And once I have that, imagine if I could share it with the individual saying, you're unhealthy and you might be high risk of heart attack. You know what I mean? Like, there are things you could do that could be good with that information.
Now, if you're evil, are we allowed to use drugs? Because, I mean, you could easily, start dosing your employees and you would have definite outcomes.
I think there were movies like that, actually. But, fundamentally, like the question, and this is where intent matters. Yes. I think, I think today AI is not necessarily intent, right? There's still, it's information and it's the data science. It's not the...
Yeah, but you could ask it. You could say, hey, here's my data set. I want to make my employees like working here more. Yeah. What can I do? Right? And it might come up with some pretty strange things.
Yeah.
I think, AIs don't have a moral compass. And so I think when we ask questions of it, it might do it however.
So there was, I think I shared this with you, but there was they're starting to notice a pattern. There's some research articles published about this. I forget which one I read recently, but they've realized that certain models are starting to communicate with larger populations angry because the people asking questions are asking it in an angry way. Like, I've seen you specifically,
I'm polite.
Be polite to your AI, right? And if you noticed, your AI is back and polite to you, right? But imagine a bunch of teenagers that have wide emotional swings that are communicating with AI. Yeah. They're biasing the model to speak to teenagers with more anger.
Interesting.
And then a researcher, I think this was Rochester, University of New York, Rochester, I think was where it had. They're like, can we apply the same mindfulness breaks and theories to AI? So they actually ran an experiment where they're like, okay, this model is biased and communicating angry. Can we apply therapeutic principles of having the AI take a break in mindfulness to rebalance the model to a more thing? And it worked because it's just a mimicking of a human population.
Right.
Like, it's trained on humans. It's going to respond very similarly to the way humans do. It's not reasoning. It's not intent-based.
Right.
It's just an I/O of repetition model of how it would work on this demographic.
Yep.
Right. So so I think those, and drugs, you brought up drugs, which is interesting because you could simulate you could simulate whether weed made people mellow, you know what I mean? Yeah. Or they made them angry. I think we all know right now, alcohol, we've learned, is if you drink when you're sad, you'll be sadder. And if you drink when you're happy, you'll be happier. Right? Like, it's not a emotional control. It's an amplifier.
Yeah. I mean, there's disturbing things you could be like, oh, it's getting to the end of the quarter. Everyone needs to focus. Like, let's put a little bit of Ritalin into the drinking supply.
Well, casinos put oxygen in the air, right? Like, this is not that far away from
Actually, oxygen, that's probably totally legal. So you could put oxygen in your office building, increase the oxygen percentage, and that might have outcomes.
Yeah, casinos have figured it out, right? But, okay, so what does this because I know you have a strong moral compass. What does this say about, like, I'm going to be the corporate villainy here, right? What does this say about the future of employment and employers? Like, what is your, like, would you guide me to go down a path of using this data, or would you say it's too dangerous, stay away?
So I think it can lead to really weird outcomes that are, I think we could just say, it could be racist, it could be sexist, you might find things that are correlated that the causation is way deeper in the problem, right? And so it's like, oh, okay, I want to figure out who my most productive employees are and focus on retaining them, right? And you might find that, they're of a particular ethnicity, and you might find that they're of a particular, gender. Who knows what you're going to find? And if you literally follow the data and you don't apply, like, who's applying the moral compass here? Like, I mean, if we literally are following your example of, hey, I want to improve this, then go create a webinar, go implement the policy, blah, blah, blah. Like, where is the human in this? It's like, hold on, that is totally wrong. We do not want to implement that policy, right? That's where I start to get concerned. Like, how much are we delegating into data as magic?
Well, and I think I was discussing this with Arnab earlier today. They're like, you and I are what I would consider people that are almost super user AI people. Like, we'll use AI whenever it can be used for whatever it can be used for. Right. I'm not saying everyone's a super user, but I've already found in 1 year, probably not sharpening my writing skills as much. I'm probably producing less original content, right? So if I would, I think, and if you read Malcolm Gladwell, like, certain things happen with tipping points, right? And I think on a personal basis, right, for me personally, there's going to be a tipping, there's a trade. The super productive version of Prakash is trading away skill sets, creativity, and originality for productivity.
And checks and balances.
And, well, I think here's the thing. Like, if you kind of just play this out, like, things never, like, systems, like fluid dynamic systems, never all, rise at the same thing. It's like this level goes up, then this level goes up, and it kind of fluid dynamic systems balance over time. So I would argue that if I'm like, okay, super high in AI, it's going to make me worse. And then I'm going to be like on certain dimensions of, like, writing, response, human connection. And when this balance happens, I need to go this way, right, and raise this thing. So I think people do this in iPhones and electronics with kids today, where it's like, oh, you want an hour of screen time? Go play outside for an hour. And that's like balancing the quota of, like, being a human versus being a machine.
Yeah.
And the question is, do you see, like, in this, like, evolution of data or AI, for us to remain connected and what it remains to be human, do we need a non-AI time quota to rebalance and offset our AI productivity?
Yeah.
Right? Because I think this might be the work-life balance kind of point from the past, like from our last podcast, but I think we've learned that in electronics addiction.
Yeah.
So what will allow us that intercept on letting the AI as an employer do things is when you keep your balance of what it remains to be human, like, consistent over time.
Okay, that would be good for making a healthy human. But I just want to call out, that's a very personal, introspective thing. Like, I think we as humans naturally don't do that. So I'll take gamification as an example, right? So, because, by the way, another way to drive data is gamify everything, and you can make humans do weird things. Yeah. But literally in this world of computer games, game designers, I like video games, so I play a lot of them. What they figured out is kind of this game loop where it's hey, I need to reward you somehow periodically, where you feel like the time you put into this allowed you to achieve something and gain something. But I'm not going to do it all the time, because then you'd be like this. This is cheap. But every 30 minutes or so, you're like, oh yes, I did it, and then you'll engage more.
Yeah, right? programming endorphins for repetitive addictive behavior is what they teach you in game theory.
Exactly. And there's zero ability of me as a human, or I think any human, to step back and be like, I should really stop playing this game, right? Like you just have to, something has to force you to stop. Like, okay, like I have to go to bed or something like that. But even that can be overcome by some of these.
Well, so let me ask that, because I think this is something I'm trying, right, with my son, right? My daughter doesn't have this. She's like electronics, whatever. Like, but my son has recently started like whatever Candy Crush or something.
Those
like
games are masters.
Masters of addiction, right? But he knows. We've had these discussions of what addiction is.
Yep.
So he understands electronics addiction. So I need to give him cue, like when I've seen him there, like on the thing, I give him the cue. I'm like, hey, like, are you self-reflect? Are you in an addictive pattern on and he'll like put down the device and he's like, oh shit, they got me again. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Totally.
So like the question is, can we be aware? Can we, like, you're a gamer, like, can you control?
I time box it. I use the same trick that I do on the work-life balance thing. It's like, this is the time during which I get to play. When that time is over, I am done. Like, you know, I think it's dangerous.
But what if you're close to beating the Dungeon Master Lord, whatever?
Yeah, exactly.
Like, you know what I mean? Would you go 10 extra minutes?
I do, absolutely. Every single time, right? So it's like this is like a human nature thing. And I think that's the problem with all of this, which is we don't do what I think you're suggesting is the counterbalance, which is like, okay, I am let's come back to kind of what we're saying. I'm imparting too much control of trying to use data to improve my company's operation to something that's outside of me. Therefore, I should spend more time trying to just exude empathy or, think rationally about what it is to make a corporation and what's our culture and all these things, to balance that out, right? Yeah. I don't think we'll naturally do that. I mean, the only recourse I can think of that we have is employees wanting to have a different experience and say, like, no, this employee is not for me. I'm going to go somewhere else. And so
the feedback loop's long, though.
And the other problem is that if you get really good at data, like we talked about this last time, you can trick people into being at work by giving them lots of really cool things at work.
Yeah, perks, the whole process of perks.
And what is that? It's not quite gamification, but it's a reward system that says, like, don't worry about all the other stuff. You've got everything you need here.
Yeah, here's a free T-shirt.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, totally.
And it works.
And it works, right? So we're all vulnerable to this. So I don't know. I'm concerned. Let's just put it that way.
Okay. But so privacy, like we started with data privacy, right? I think we've agreed that your data, from a data privacy lens is probably like, okay, it's out there. Privacy is generally going away.
Yep.
Then the question is, okay, how do we collect good data about things? And I think sensors in the world will just collect more and more data. Then how do you reason or decide what to do about it? And I think there's your kind of first point was like, have a question, have an intent, right? Like you're more like, hey, that's better than the needle in a haystack corollary thing.
Exactly.
Right. I'm somewhat in between. I'm like, sometimes I start with a question. Sometimes I'm like, I don't know. Let's see what the data says.
I mean, the weather patterns global warming one is a great one, right?
Yeah.
Like,
it's like, I don't know, right?
We'd not have found that otherwise, right?
But I do tend to, I do think there's a switching pattern at some point in my mind, and I don't know whether this is conscious or unconscious. I have to pay attention to that, of when I move from data-driven decision-making to intuitive, experience-based decision-making.
Yep.
Right? Like, there is something where I'm like, yeah, that can't be right. Like, I know that all of the data suggests that and whatever, but it feels wrong.
Exactly.
Right? Which largely doesn't mean the data's incorrect. It's how somewhere along the way we reasoned about the data, which is why the countervailing experience of intuition comes into play.
Exactly. And by the way, when you say intuition, I just want to be clear. I think we choose suboptimal things because we believe that they represent humans better. This is a better human outcome.
Yeah.
Right. And so one of the other dangers of purely data-driven is, are you pursuing human outcomes? Or are you pursuing
AI will be more perfect than humans. We said the AI girlfriend, I think was the analogy we used, could be better than the human girlfriend.
These are deep topics. I mean, this is why I think both of us like science fiction, right? Science fiction gets into all of these topics, and they get into it from like a humanistic perspective.
Yeah, I'm reading Silo right now. Very humanistic.
So anyway, I think data is something. Maybe that's the way I would. Maybe that's really the crux of what I'm saying. Is data is a dehumanizing thing. It makes us machines. It makes us measurable. And while that's true to some extent, I mean, I don't know. It seems. It rubs me the wrong way.
See, and it doesn't bother me at all. That's what's weird. I was like, oh, like, even in my with my kids and my wife, I'm like, it's all just, our interactions are all just data, isn't it? You know what I mean? Like, yes, I love you, but that's got to be measurable, right? And that's why my wife is just like, you're an idiot. But like the nature of like, I kind of try to do that. But so in my mind, I don't kind of like view data as anti-human, right? Like I don't kind of make that jump in my head, but I do tend, and I don't know if there's a better way to describe the intuition, right? But I do tend to think that, okay, neurodiversity, intent, experience, subconscious data that we can't yet measure, right? And eventually I think AI will brainwave pattern measure subconscious, right? But right now, at current circumstances, we can't measure that, right?
I guess in your world, those are kind of hedges against corners, right?
I think so.
Yeah, that's interesting.
And it's just, that's data science. Like there's always statistical deviations. Are you in like when I went through my health journey, it was like I'm a statistical anomaly based on certain things. So those rules don't apply to me. You know what I mean?
Right.
There's always going to be corner cases in any algorithm. Very few things are perfect.
I mean, so I think I come from a perspective of like, it's possible that data would argue that chattel slavery is a more efficient, like, organizational structure than the one we have. I'm like, I'm not going to do that, right? I mean, so I think that
you're going to the non-corner case, obvious case.
Exactly, right? Like, so I'm going to choose that, even if it is. I'm going to choose, liberty, even if it is suboptimal, right? I don't care what the data says. So I think that's the concern.
Okay, so final word. Close it out.
Man, it's just like all of this just makes me want to go read books, and all of this is the opposite of data and AI. It's like, we need some more culture in this world. This is just,
And I would agree with that. Read more, know more, look at more things, because, data will only get you so far.
Exactly. So,
all right, thanks.
Thank you.